Welcome to the Index Fresh Avocado Cultural Seminar on high-density orchard management and avocado varieties past, present, and future. Our first presentation will be given by Dr. Mary Lou Arpaia from UC Riverside.
We're going to talk about California avocado varieties, past, present, and future. So I thought I would review for you initially what is the avocado, because I was sure that there'll probably be some newer growers in the audience, and some of you I know probably all know this, but the avocado is a member of the laurel family, and the laurel family is a very large family. It's mainly tropical evergreen trees. There's about 50 genera in this plant family, and you can see over 3,000 species. So it's a very large family, very diverse. It's found in the Old World and in Asia and in the New World, primarily Central America. The family is actually, if you know anything about botany, we have the angiosperms, which are the flowering plants, like sunflowers, citrus are all angiosperms. Avocado is an angiosperm. And then we have the gymnosperms, which are the pine trees. Well, the angiosperms evolved right at the end of the time of the dinosaurs. And the avocado, the Lauraceae, is a very, very primitive angiosperm, and it actually has some of the traits of the gymnosperms. And that's very important because when we think about what do we know about plants and their biology and the genetics of the plants, the higher order angiosperms are the ones that have been studied mostly. And these very primitive angiosperms, like the avocado, are not very well understood at all. So we have a long way to go in understanding avocado. Now, commercial important variety members of the laurel family are the cinnamon, bay laurel that we use in cooking, the California bay tree that is a native here to California. That's a beautiful tree. The red bay laurel, which you've heard about, the red bay laurel wilt caused by the ambrosia beetle in the southeast United States. That is a member of the laurel family and a very important, similar to the California bay tree. Sassafras, which was historically the source of root beer, all members of the laurel family. Then we have several Persea species that are found in Florida that are live in the Everglades. Very important to the ecology of the Everglades and also very important to the native indigenous peoples of the Florida area. And then most of the Persea and its close relatives are found in Mexico and in Central America. And that's why we are very, very concerned about the spread of the red bay ambrosia beetle, because these trees are very important trees in the forest areas for the forest ecology of Mexico and Central America. And as this beetle spreads, it's on the west side of the Mississippi now, we are very concerned about it spreading down into Mexico, and we'll probably get it coming back up through Mexico. So we have to be very diligent going forward because the avocado is very sensitive to this disease insect complex. Now, avocados are a very ancient crop, being grown more as a dooryard crop. They have found seeds several thousands of years old in archaeological digs, both in Mexico, Central America, and also even in Peru. The Spanish first described it shortly after Columbus came to the New World, and some of the first records of avocado, written records in Europe, date back to the early 1500s. As shown here up in this little picture, here's a picture of a guy. The thing says that he's holding a bowl of guacamole, and this is an avocado tree. I don't know. But the word avocado is derived from the Spanish word aguacate, which is derived from an Aztec word. It's also known as palta in Chile and other parts of South America. And in Africa, it's known as the alligator pear. And actually, I lived in Sierra Leone for a year, and people were talking about the alligator pear, and I didn't have a clue what it was until they pointed it out to me and said, oh, an avocado. So it goes by many names. It's a very ancient crop from that perspective. But in terms of domestication, being grown commercially is a relatively new crop. So the first commercial plantings were not in California. They were in Florida. And Florida began packing and shipping avocados in the early 1900s. And it was the success of that industry growing in Florida, shipping into the eastern seaboard, that really prompted people to look at the avocado in California and get excited about it as a commercial crop. The species is highly diverse, as you can see in this picture, little fruit to large fruit. It grows in very diverse terrain. In Mexico, this was a picture was taken by Motozincla, which is a small town on the Guatemalan border in Chiapas. You can see it's very dry and arid. And about 60 miles away, I took this picture, again, home of the avocado. And in fact, these green trees here are all avocado trees. This is another picture in Chiapas of a wild avocado tree. So it's highly diverse. It retains many of its traits of its native heritage. And so it's not tamed. We haven't tamed it like we've tamed citrus or table grapes or apples or pears, which have been in commercial production for hundreds and even thousands of years. And because that is relatively new to domestication, the horticulture or the physiology of the tree is very poorly understood. So bottom line, we have a lot to learn still about the avocado. So the avocado, Persea americana, is divided into 3 horticultural races: Mexican, Guatemalan, and West Indian, sometimes called Antillean. Again, very diverse. And where do these 3 races come from? So the Mexican race is from the middle part of Mexico, more arid, colder, higher elevation. The Guatemalan race is from the highlands of Guatemala. And the West Indian race is actually native to the Pacific seaboard of Central America, as you can see here. Okay? So those are where the 3 races come from, but these 3 races easily hybridize. And so many of the avocados we grow commercially today, Hass included, are hybrids of one of these 3 races. So the general traits, so if we break down the pure representatives of these races, the Mexican race is from the Mexican highlands, Guatemala highlands, tropical lowlands. You can see Mexican and Guatemalan are more subtropical, West Indian more tropical. You can see there's a difference in cold tolerance and salinity tolerance. So unfortunately for us, we in California grow Mexican Guatemalan hybrids. And here we have, for salinity, the least tolerant and intermediate, whereas the West Indian race is the most tolerant to salinity, and that's very important today as we face issues with water quality here in California. You can see there's other differences. What I wanted to mention, if you have a Mexican race avocado, if you go and you crush the leaf and you smell it, it has this wonderful anise odor to it. So fuerte, if you have a fuerte tree or a zotano tree, crush the leaf and smell the leaf. It smells wonderful of anise. The seasonality of the fruit varies depending on the race, as you can see here, early and late, and the time that the fruit takes to mature after bloom varies greatly. Some of the fruit traits, you can see here that very thin peel is characteristic of the Mexican race. On the other hand, Guatemalan race has a very thick peel. So think of reed. Reed is believed to be almost pure Guatemalan, very thick peel. If you have Topa Topa, Stewart, Bacon, Zotano, they're all predominantly Mexican race, and they all have a relatively thin peel. So there are big differences between varieties depending on what race they are predominantly. The other thing is oil content and flavor. You can see that the Mexican and the Guatemalan races have the highest oil content, and the West Indian race, which is grown predominantly in Florida and in the Caribbean, have the lowest oil content. And you know, the Floridians market their avocados as the light avocado because they have low oil content. So avocados now are currently produced worldwide. The more tropical areas like the Brazil and the Philippines, which have a lot of avocados, they produce mainly West Indian varieties. And most of the leading avocado producers of the world that sell fruit commercially, they're growing Guatemalan and Mexican. And today, the world leading cultivar is the Hass. Okay, so the Hass is spread around the world. It is believed to be predominantly Guatemalan Mexican hybrid. And it's the leading cultivar worldwide, and I will come back to that point a little bit later. So how about the history of avocados in California? We're not really sure when avocados came to California, but we do know, if you read the California Avocado Society yearbook, some of the early accounts of the avocados, is that by the 1870s, there were trees planted in California as dooryard trees. And this picture is actually a picture of one of those original trees that was planted in Santa Barbara at the home of a grower. And this picture was taken by Dr. Franceschi, who is a pioneer of subtropicals in California. Dr. Franceschi is the one that introduced Feijoa and was an early promoter of Cherimoya in California. But here's a picture in the 1870s. Not much happens in California until 1911. And in 1911, there's two very significant things that occur. First of all, the very first budded trees are sold in California. Up until that point in time, all the avocados that were planted were just seedling trees. So in 1911, we have the first budded trees sold, but probably even more significant is that in 1911, the Fuerte is introduced into California by Carl Schmidt, who was working for the West India Gardens, and the West India Garden Nursery in Altadena was owned by the Papineau family. So I think many of you know about Wilson Papineau, who was a major plant explorer, not only for avocados, but many other subtropicals. And his father owned West India Garden Nursery in Altadena. And this is a very significant event in the history of avocados, not only for California, but for the world. Then in 1915, so between 1911 and 1915, we think that we're in an avocado revolution now. The teens 100 years ago was the avocado revolution. People got turned on. Seed was selling for $5 a seed, not $5 in 2017 dollars, but $5 in 1915. Avocados were a hot commodity. People were planting thousands of seedlings and having their own breeding programs in their backyards. And hundreds of varieties were being named. Just between 1911 and 1915, when they had the first meeting of the California Avocado Society, it was called the California Avocado Growers Association at that time, Wilson Papineau reports already 86 named varieties. Again, a revolution in avocados. The world is waking up. California is waking up to avocados in the mid-teens, just 100 years ago. So I want to spend a little bit of time on the Fuerte avocado. This is from an article written by Wilson Papineau in 1919 talking about the Fuerte. So this is a picture of Alejandro LeBlanc, who was the person who had the Fuerte avocado in Jalisco, Mexico, holding some fruit and standing by that mother tree. When this picture was taken in 1911, it was believed the tree was about 60 years old. So this is the original tree. I've had an opportunity to visit Jalisco, Mexico with George Goodall in 1990. Unfortunately, the tree is not there, but the plaque the California Avocado Society put in that dooryard is still there, but the tree is long since gone. Now, why is the Fuerte so important? Introduced in 1911, mentioned by its name for the first time, it was introduced and described as avocado selection number 15. By 1920, it is named the Fuerte by West Indian Gardens, and already in 1920, you read the Avocado Society yearbook, it says this is the #1 avocado variety to grow in California. Very quick, in 9 years, it goes to being recognized as a fruit of high quality. And it's the leading variety in California from 1920 to 1970. We tend to forget that there was anything but Hass. Fuerte, #1, and #1 variety in the commercial world for many years. Israel, South Africa, many other countries, Fuerte is the #1 variety and is a significant variety even today in Israel and South Africa. It was claimed to be widely adapted to different climates. It was known for its high fruit quality. And then later on, as you read the old yearbooks, you'll see all of a sudden there's a little bit of complaints coming along. You know, oh, it's a big tree, it's hard to pick. But by the 1930s already, it's being recognized that it's erratic or has severe alternate bearing. Okay? The other interesting thing when you read the yearbook is all of a sudden you read that there's all these different strains of Fuerte, like we read about apples, different strains of red delicious and golden delicious apples. There's different strains of Fuerte. And people then become confused about what is the original Fuerte. So what I thought I'd do is I made a list for myself of all the varieties that we commercially grow today. And I thought I would go back in time with you to let you know when these things originated and where they originated from. Now, Lion, I'm sure most of you have never heard of the Lion variety. That it originated as a seedling in 1908. It was planted in all places, Hollywood, because Hollywood was a major center of avocado production in the early days. I mention the Lion because Lion is believed to be the mother of Hass. That's the only reason why it's on the list, but it's interesting that it arose in 1908. So here we have Fuerte. 1911 is when it was brought into California, first described at the very first California Avocado Growers meeting in 1915. The next one up that we're still growing today, Hass. It was a chance seedling planted in 1926 in La Habra Heights. It was first introduced or described in the California Avocado Society yearbook in 1932, patented in 1935. And you'll notice on this slide there is only one patented variety, and it's the Hass. Now, how many of you knew that Zutano arose in Fallbrook in 1926? I didn't know that until I read the yearbook. First described in 1932. Edronol is another local variety here to San Diego. Seedling planted in 1927. In Vista, first described in 1932. And then we have Bacon, seedling in 1928 in Buena Park, and here not described to 1948. So the point here being also, you can see it takes a long time for varieties to gain attention, especially if you think about the Bacon. Okay, a few words about Hass. So this is Rudolph Hass. He was a postal worker, and his wife Elizabeth Hass. This is the California Avocado Society. This is a slide I got from my predecessor, Bob Platt. And this is the California Avocado Society visiting the Mother Hass tree, which is still alive at the time, in the 1960s. And this is the plaque that they placed at the base of the tree. Unfortunately, the tree is not alive anymore, and it's in the middle of someone's front yard now. But the plaque is still there. If you go looking in La Habra Heights, you can find the place where the original Hass tree grew. So trans seedling in 1926, patented in 1935. If you read the old yearbooks, it's not mentioned in the yearbooks until about the time it was patented. It was considered interesting, but its black skin, because remember, Forte is the #1 variety right now, was considered a flaw. The black skin was considered a flaw. And it did not overtake Forte in importance in California until the 1970s. So a very long gestation period, patented 1936, leading variety 1970. Long time. It is now the worldwide leading variety in major variety marketed in the United States. And as you probably all know, 95% of the acreage in California now is this one variety. It's a high quality fruit when it's harvested at proper maturity. Now, this is a quote taken from the 1945 Society Yearbook in an article that's called The Hass Avocado, and it talks about the Hass avocado. Here's a picture of the tree in 1945. But read this. From the market standpoint, the Hass would appear to have everything. Excellent quality, popular size, small seed, good shipper, leathery skin, and long season complementing the Forte. Its single disadvantage is its black color, which has been associated in the minds of the public with poor quality fruits. Now I'm told when I run the breeding program, we can't have a green skin, it has to be black. We're fickle, I think. Experience is indicating, however, that when properly handled, this color handicap can be overcome. The Hass variety gives satisfaction and repeat business follows. How the world has changed, huh? So this was written in 1945. In the mid-1950s, Bob Berg came to UC Riverside as the avocado breeder. And he has told me more than once, he met with the California industry. He was said, we need a green skin Hass. We want you to breed a green skin Hass. We don't want this Hass fruit that's black. And he spent from 1955 to 1982 developing what he thought was going to be that answer to that challenge that he was given. And that variety is called the Gwen avocado. But these are the three varieties then that originated before 1940 beside the Hass. And so now we go from 1940 to 1980. What happened in the varieties that we currently have today? Well, we have Edinger. It was a seedling from Israel. It's a seedling of Forte, actually. Planted in 1940, introduced into California in 1954. We have the Reed. 1948 in Carlsbad, described in 1953, patented in 1967. And what year would you say that the Reed has now become a commercial variety? It's barely now becoming a commercial variety. So how long is that? That's older than me, and I'm old. So then we have the Charwell, 1951. It's unclear when it was introduced into California, probably in the early 60s. Pinkerton, 1960 from Satakoy, registered in 1974 and patented in 1975. What I'm trying to show you is that these varieties that we rely on today are very, very old. That's not necessarily bad, but we have to remember that they've been around for a long time. So this is just a picture of the different ones. Edinger and is used as a pollinizer variety. Here's Reed. Pinkerton, not grown too much anymore, but it has post-harvest problems, but a very good eating fruit. I'm fond of the Pinkerton because it was the very first avocado that I did a research project on when I came to Riverside. So I have a fondness for that. And here's Kona Charwell, another bee flower type that could be used as a pollinizer. Now, what happens after 1980? So I talked about Bob Berg. You will breed a green skin Hass. Well, he comes out with the Gwen, named after his wife, and a seedling planted in Irvine. introduced to the California Avocado Society in 1982, patented in 1984. At the same time he introduced Gwen, he introduced two other varieties, Witzel and Esther. Witzel is named after his longtime technician, Bob Witzel, and Esther was Bob Witzel's wife. After he planted these, of course, by 1982, who's the dominant variety? Hass. And what is going on in the early 1980s in California? Ripe for tonight. And what is the main keystones of ripe for tonight in the early 1980s? Black when ripe. The Gwen had no place in the marketplace. It quickly was a flash in the pan. It was introduced about the time that I came to Riverside, and I remember there was a lot of excitement. Warren Courier, some of you remember Warren Courier. He was talking about we should call it the Gwen Hass. There was a Gwen Growers Association. I went to a couple of those meetings, but that didn't last very long. But the one thing about Gwen is that Bob Berg decided, I'm not going to give up. I'm going to go and try to do things again. And in the 1986, they planted out 60,000 seed of different sources of seed, but Gwen was the primary source of the seed that he planted out in different parts of California, in Mentone, and up by Napomo, and then there was the Bob Lamb Ranch in Camarillo. He planted out most of the seeds. And out of that cohort of seedlings comes the Lamb Hass, named after the Lamb Ranch in Camarillo, the Surprise, which was planted in Irvine, the Gem, and the Harvest. Of these four, the Surprise is the only one that's not a Gwen seedling. It's a seedling of another offspring of Gwen. Okay, all patented varieties, you can see here, released at different times. When I took the program over in 1996, right after Lamb Hass and Surprise had been patented by Gray Martin and Bob Berg. At the time, there was no interest in Gem. Gray thought because season overlapped Hass, and Hass was such a dominant variety, there would be no way that Gem could go anywhere. And so he basically did not push for patenting Gem. Harvest is a variety that has a lot of problems, but it can be grown in very hot areas, but is very cold sensitive. So here's Gwen, a beautiful tree and a beautiful fruit, very good to eat. It's season it overlaps Hass. Here's Lamb Hass, Gem, and Surprise. So what I want to do is just spend a few minutes then talking about Lamb Hass and Gem. So here's Lamb Hass. You can see it's characteristic, more square shaped than Hass. And another very good characteristic of the Lamb Hass is the stem is almost always right on top of the fruit. Okay, so you can almost always, whereas Hass is usually a little bit off center. So the Lamb Hass maturity season, mid to late summer. It is after Hass. It is not a substitute for Hass, but a supplement to the Hass season. The fruit shape, it tends to be larger size, but more square shape. It has a very nice upright growth habit. It has flexible wood, so even though the flowers are on the outside of the tree, as the fruit grows, the fruit are drawn into the interior of the tree. That Lamb Hass, if you have a problem with Persea mite, the Lamb Hass tends to be very, very tolerant to Persea mite. We've done surveys out in the field where Hass and Gwen is a magnet for Persea mite, completely stressed out from Persea mite, and the Lamb Hass is like, well, what's going on? So we've done some physiology work on the Lamb Hass, and we found that comparing it to Hass, it has about a 30% higher rate of photosynthesis, which means it's probably more efficient, and it has a higher chlorophyll content in the leaves on average. So it's an interesting variety. This is just to show you, this is a picture taken in Duluth. This is Hass, outlined in yellow, and this is Lamb Hass. These trees are the same age. How about Gem? So I told you, Gray Martin decided that it wasn't worthwhile to release a Gem. because it has the same seasonality as Hass, or roughly the same seasonality. But why do I think the maturity season overlaps. But I believe that 15 years from now, we'll be standing here and we'll be talking gem, and people will go, what is Hass? I don't remember Hass. Why? Because it can be a substitute to Hass. It can accumulate very high levels of dry matter. When you're doing dry matter readings of Hass, they usually level out about 34 to 35% dry matter. Gem can get up into the 40s. I don't like the fruit that oily, but I mean, it's really an interesting attribute of the fruit. The fruit shape is more teardrop. The gem is basically a black-skinned Gwen. It has a very, very, if you're familiar with the Gwen, the gem is very, very similar. It has a sort of a compact vase shape. We were measuring trees yesterday after I gave the talk for Index, and the gem trees are probably 40% the size of the Hass trees in the trial that we were planting the trees. And they're all the same age. Like lamb, has flexible wood, so the fruit are borne on the inside of the tree. Just like lamb, it tends to set fruit in clusters. We really don't know too much about pest tolerance. I don't think is as tolerant to Perseamite as Hass, lamb Hass, but is more tolerant than Hass. It is definitely less alternate bearing. I'm going to show you some data on that. And it tends to be more productive under most conditions. So we have data now from the San Joaquin Valley. Fruit size is reduced somewhat, but you know what? It's growing up there, whereas the Hass struggles a little bit. So the gem is a more compact tree, as you can see here, and it tends to bear the fruit on the inside of the tree. So when I took over the program in 1996, one of the very first things I wanted to do is set up some topwork trials. So we set topwork trials in 5 different parts of the state, and then we went around and we collected yield data once those topworks started bearing. So on the left side of all these graphs is the gem. So I'll let you conclude which one had higher cumulative yield. The other thing to look at is look at the bars. You can see that there is less alternation, for the most part, in the gem compared to the Hass. So it's less alternate bearing. And this data has been shown over and over again in work that they've done in South Africa and other trials that we've had in California. It has lower alternate bearing. I'm not going to say it doesn't have alternate bearing. I don't ever want anybody to say, Mary Lou said it doesn't alternate bear. It does alternate bear, but the extremity of the alternate bearing is much less. Now, one thing I forgot to mention was the fact that we all consider Hass to be an alternate bearer, right? We always complain, oh, you know, if we can only solve the alternate bearing problem at Hass, we would have everything solved. Back in the 1940s, that was one of the key points of Hass. It was better than Fuerte. So, what's the lesson to be learned? We always need to be moving forward. We always need to be looking for that golden apple out in front of our nose that we can improve things. And I am sure that we can improve on gem down the road. So here's fruit size. At all sites, I apologize, this is in grams, but you can see gem range from 170 to 294 grams, Hass 129 to 270. Alternate bearing. So what I did is you can calculate an alternate bearing index by taking the yield from year 1 and comparing it to year 2. And then if you have multiple years of data, you can look at the multiple years for a given site, and you can calculate an alternate bearing index. The lower the number, the lower the alternate bearing. Okay, so a score of 0 would be no alternate bearing. Okay, so you can see the gem does alternate bear, but it's substantially less than the Hass. It has a score a little bit above 0.5, which means that there is alternate bearing, but it's not as severe as Hass. Okay, and it ranged from 0.43 to 0.7. and Hass ranged from 0.65 to 0.89. 0.89 is almost complete alternate bearing, because a score of 1 would be fruit one year and no fruit the next. Okay? What I would like to tell you is that think of Hass is probably 70-30, 80-20, somewhere in there. 70% one year, 30% the next. Gem is probably 50-60 one year and 40-50 the next year. So 60-40. So we've made some strides in terms of reducing alternate bearing with the gem. Now, we had other varieties in these trials. Gem was always ranked number 1 or number 2. The other one that was the lead producer in these trials was Lamb Hass. Okay? And I'll come back to this. We noted that climate can greatly influence fruit shape. And we had a trial up in the San Joaquin Valley. We had a very bad freeze in 2007 when we had this trial. And fruit from harvest, from Hass, from the other varieties we had, they all, within about 2 weeks of the freeze, everything was on the ground. The gem really didn't drop its fruit, but more importantly, it was the only one that came back with a bloom. So I think it has a little bit more cold tolerance, and it definitely appears to have a little bit more heat tolerance than the Hass. So how about flowering? It flowers a little bit later than Hass. So this green line this is an Irvine. This is a flowering progression for Hass, and this is a gem in the same year. Now, we collected similar data for 4 years. So this is the bloom time for Hass over a 4-year period. Here's Lamb Hass, and here is gem. So you can see that it tends to be a little bit later than Hass in terms of its flowering. How about maturity? So there was a thing in the Avocado Newsline, if you read the Avocado Newsline a couple months ago, saying a study was done on the gem, and a recommendation for minimum maturity of gem is 26%. I'm going to get on my soapbox now. So I agree. A 26% dry matter gem is good to eat. The same goes for Hass. How many of you like to eat Hass when it's 20.8% dry matter? Early in the season when it's illegal to pick. How many people really like how the Hass tastes then? No one's raising their hand. Yeah, that's right. That's right. And when we've done a lot of taste panels on Hass, when does the Hass begin to really taste good? 26% dry matter. So the gem is not different than the Hass in that regard. But we have minimum maturity standards. The minimum maturity standard for Hass is 20.6. Some of the greenskins are around 18%. Lamb Hass is 22.8. And in 2006, I was asked to give a recommendation to the Avocado Inspection Committee, and I recommended 22.8% as the minimum dry matter. Not optimum, minimum. It's very clear that the optimum dry matter for most varieties that we grow, the Guatemalan Mexican hybrids like Lamb Hass, Gwen, Hass, and gem, should be 25-26%. But we don't want to put ourselves in a straitjacket by establishing a minimum maturity that is very high and may be difficult to achieve in certain years. So this graph shows that it tracks a little bit later than Hass, and this is multiple seasons from Irvine tracking the dry matter. You can see the dry matter does vary from year to year in terms of how it tracks. And so, this is early January, and this is going into, so if we had said 26% as a minimum dry matter for the gem, as was recommended in the Avocado Newsline, we would not be picking that fruit until May. So I think that's something we have to consider going forward as we establish the minimum maturity. Now, when I met with the Avocado Inspection Committee in 2006, I made the recommendation for 22.8. That letter was written to Ross Wyman, who was the current chair of the AIC, and I just always assumed it was in the code, but it's not in the code. If you go to the code, it was never entered into the code. So we know that the gem is a good eating fruit, and we know that it has good post-harvest characteristics, not because of work that I've done, but work that's been done in South Africa. As you probably have all known, is being grown widely and marketed and licensed to the University of California by Westphalia, and they are shipping fruit from South Africa into Europe with great success. Now, I want to get to the last section of the talk. Is there life after Hass? So I've sort of shown my belief. I think that we need to be looking forward, and I'm going to give you two perspectives on this. One is what has happened to the California market window. So this blue line on the graph is data average between 1983 and 1992, when we had the U.S. market basically to ourselves, because California has always produced about 90% of all the avocados marketed in the U.S. So we basically have the U.S. market to ourselves, and you can see the blue line. Yes, we have a peak in March, April, and May. Already Hass is the #1 variety. And, but you can see we're present in the market 12 months of the year. Now, this green line is 1997, when Chile exceeded shipment into the United States of 20 million pounds. And so this data is from 97, 98 through 2004, 2005. And you can see what happens is this green line, the green line is you can see that the California season now has become a little bit more compressed. Okay, we have more Hass planted already by that time, but you also can see that we're being a little bit more squeezed. Now, the next slide, the next line is the purple line. And what is this line? This line is the average from 2005 to 2010, and this is the period of time in which Mexico now has entered the U.S. market. And what happens? We're becoming a mountain. First of all, now we're over 90% of the market is Hass, and we're being squeezed more and more. Now I was able to get data from the Hass Avocado Board website since 2010. That's when Peru has entered the market, and you can see now we're basically Mount Everest. So we're more and more compressed. So we're only in the market certain months of the year. If we want to maintain a reputation, we need to at least go back to what we were when we had the market to ourselves. We need to have 12-month coverage. We can't do that with Hass. Excellent fruit that it is, high quality eating, gold standard in terms of fruit quality. But we have to, I believe, to sustain the California industry, we have to be in the market more months of the year. So the question I pose to you is, what will happen when the marketing window, when Colombia, which we know is coming in, South Africa is waiting with bated breath to be approved, and the whole list of other countries that have petitioned the USDA to be allowed to come into to the United States. What's going to happen to us then? Will we be squeezed even further when 95% of our industry is Hass? So now, there is a silver lining to this if we think a little bit out of the box. If you go to the USDA website that's called Favor, here you can go in and you can type in avocado, and it will tell you all the countries in the world that are allowed to ship avocado into the mainland United States. And if you go and look at that, there's 25 countries. So that's more than Peru and Mexico and Chile and Dominican Republic and New Zealand. That's only 4 countries. The rest of those countries are mainly countries in the Caribbean who grow West Indian varieties. And if you look, they also tell you where they can ship the fruit into. It's all ports of entry on the eastern seaboard. Okay? But what does that tell us? It tells us in the market of the U.S., there is already demand for things other than Hass. because these Caribbean countries are shipping fruit into the U.S. and it's not Hass. Another thing, major importing sources of avocado, Mexico, Chile, Peru, soon to be Colombia. Mexico and Peru and Colombia will be only limited to Hass. Petition for South Africa will likely be only Hass. Now, what is the silver lining here? Okay, so we know the Caribbean countries can ship other fruit than Hass into the U.S. There's a market for it. Maybe California can really break out and differentiate itself as growing niche varieties to this growing base of avocado consumption. When I was hired at the University of California in 1983, the per capita consumption was less than ½ a pound per person per year. What is the average? Does anybody know what the average per capita consumption in the United States is now? Over 10 pounds. We've had an avocado revolution. I mean, all my nieces and nephews that are in their 30s, my son sits around critiquing all the different varieties from the breeding program. Oh, this one's no good, Mom. This one's fantastic. I give fruit to my nephew, my niece's husband in Charlotte, North Carolina. He sends me a 2-page report that he shared avocados with all his neighbors and which ones they liked and which ones they didn't and where can they buy them. People are ready for something different than what we're giving them. So, Hass, it can be improved. It's a big tree. Its bearing habit, it bears the fruit predominantly on the outside of the tree, sunburn, wind scarring, etc. I mean, it's better than Fuerte, but we know we can do better in terms of alternate bearing. We know that it's very salt sensitive. We know that it doesn't really like high heat, and we know that it doesn't really like cold. We know that it's very susceptible to Persea mite. And productivity. The state average is just about 65 to 7,000 pounds per acre. We can do better than that. To be a sustainable industry, we probably need 15 to 20,000 pounds per acre. Everybody having 15 to 20,000 pounds per acre. And bottom line, it is very, very dangerous to be an industry that's based on one variety. If we get a pest or disease that is lethal to Hass, we will be wiped out. Well, Mexico will be wiped out, and Chile will be wiped out, and Peru will be wiped out if they get something too. But we need to diversify so that we keep safe for the future. Because we don't want an avocado industry 5 or 10 years from now. We want an avocado industry in California 100 years from now. We want people to say, you know, the people in 2017, they were really smart. They ensured that we have an avocado industry today. So we need to go from here to stay competitive. I believe we need to go to high density because labor is more expensive. We can't afford to pick big trees. The smaller trees are easier to manage. So there is challenges of finding new avocado varieties. They have a long seasonality. And when you have a couple thousand seedlings planted in a field, how do you know when to pick that avocado to see if it's any good to eat? The success rate, if for every 1,000 seed you plant out, only about, if you're lucky, 10 of those seedlings will be any good to eat. So the success rate is very low, typical of fruit trees, so breeding in general. So eating quality changes, so that's a challenge, trying to figure out when it's the best time to pick the fruit. And Hass does set a very high standard, so we're looking for things that are equal or better than Hass. Very hard goal. So what are we looking for? We're looking for precocious, which means early bearing, low alternate bearing, high fruit quality, and we're looking for this upright, slender tree architecture so that we can go into high density planting. So do we have alternatives to Hass? Well, this is a picture of Jim. But we have a couple other ones. So we're going to see Eric Folk here. He's a human yardstick here. So here's 4654-1899, nicknamed Junior, because Eric is very fond of this one, so we call it Junior. But you can see its bearing capacity. That's all fruit on there. Here's another one, 4655 1899, nicknamed Bumpy because I can't ever remember these numbers. And you can see the peel of the fruit is a little bit bumpy, but this bumpiness seems to go away as the trees get older. You can see it's a much more compact tree than the previous one. Here is 4649 18. It's a small round fruit, peaks at about size 60. You go, well, you know, we don't want a size 60. This fruit is really pretty amazing. It's been lost in my refrigerator at home for 8-9 weeks and no chill and injury. So we're really excited about this one. It's an early season fruit. Both the previous one, this one, 4655 18, and this one could fit into that November through January market window. You can see it's a bigger tree, but it bears a lot of fruit. This is a very late fruit, 465202. Again, a small fruit, very high quality fruit, later probably than even lamb has. And it's a very, very nice tree. You can see it here. And this just gives you a perspective here. So this is 4649 18, that small fruit. Here's the 465202, the 4654 junior, 4655 18 bumpy. And then one I didn't talk about is the BL516. This is the last leftover of the Berg breeding program, not released under Bob Berg, but again, a seedling originating at the Bob Lamb Ranch in Camarillo. This one is interesting, first of all, because it's a bee flower type. It has a beautiful, slender tree, no wider, really, as a young tree than this podium. It doesn't bear a lot of fruit, but the fruit it bears is unbelievable to eat. Now, it has a narrow market window. Harvest season would probably be about April through early July. But it can be used as a pollinizer. These are just some of the other selections we have just to show you the kinds of tree architecture that you can get, these very narrow, compact trees. And I mentioned environmental influences. We have plots in different parts of the state. So we have one in the San Joaquin Valley. Here's one down in Irvine. Here you can see the half size is reduced up in the San Joaquin Valley. The length of the fruit of gem is not reduced, but you can see it's a much more slender fruit. The same here, the junior is not doing well up in the valley at all. But you can see here's that one I call Bumpy. Its size is really not that negatively impacted, and in fact, it loses its neck. And then here's that little round one. You can see it stays small, but it's a narrower fruit. So we have a long way to go in the San Joaquin Valley, but I believe that we can have an industry up in the valley. And why is that important for you as a grower? Because the people up in the valley will augment the production here in San Diego and in Ventura County. And there's a lot of interest up in the valley now to grow avocados. So this is just to show you Irvine, Santa Paula, Duluth. We have plots, and you can see Irvine and Santa Paula from a climate perspective are very similar. Duluth is a little bit cooler, and you can see the fruit is a little bit rounder in both the cases here. So what about eating quality? I was trained as a post-harvest biologist, so I'm always interested in post-harvest and eating quality, and we've collected a lot of data over the last 3 or 4 years at Riverside running consumer panels. And we've asked people to rate both the external and the eating quality of the fruit, and this is just a picture of one of those taste panels. And this is just an example of the kind of data. So we have our panelists rate the fruit from 1 to 9 scale, 1 being you don't like it, 9 is unbelievably good. And in this particular test, here's Hass, California Hass, and here's gem from an external perspective. So you can see gem is rated from an external perspective a little bit better than Hass. And then here's the eating quality. And here in this case, this is a California Hass, but it's the lowest of the bunch. Now, we had a grower field day at UC Riverside in October of 2014. Here I had Northern California Hass that was given to me by, I believe this fruit came from Index. And we had lamb Hass, 465202, BL516, another selection, and this one that's junior, 465418. And you can see this one actually, when I did the statistics, beat out everything. So we do have things in the program that eat just as good or maybe slightly better than Hass. And this is the 4654, nice slender tree, fruit on the interior of the tree, hangs on the tree well into the fall. So the big picture, my idea is that we need to have both dark skin and green skin varieties that are comparable to Hass in terms of eating quality. That is a very high standard. We have to have material in California so that we have 12-month market coverage. We need to improve our tree architecture by genetics, although we can do that by manipulation. You'll hear a talk about that later. We need varieties that are precocious. That means they come into heavy bearing in years 3 or 4, not 5 or 6. And we need to have greater yield efficiency, which means we need to put more fruit on smaller trees so that we can, and plant more trees per acre so that we can get into those numbers that is sustainable. So we always bear in mind that it's a road from the grove to the consumer, and we always have to remember that that's a continuum. And so the ultimate goal of the program that I've been heading is enhanced productivity and production efficiency for you, the grower, and also satisfied consumers and increased consumption, because we want the per capita consumption in the United States not to be 10 pounds per capita. We want it 20 or 25 pounds per capita. We want to be #1 in the world in terms of avocado consumption. And so we're always looking at what is the acceptability of these new selections to consumers. So I want to thank you for your attention. And if you want to read more about the history of the avocado industry, the California Avocado Study yearbooks are a wonderful source of information. Also, I took data information from the UC Experiment Station and USDA documents, and all of this can be found on avocadosource.com. So just fingertip typing away, and you can have all this information too. Thank you very much. The question is, do any of the commercial varieties we have? Not to our knowledge. Now, we have the VC rootstocks that were introduced from Israel. We're not 100% certain, but Dr. Benyakov, who selected those, believed that those are mainly West Indian. And so that's why it's a little bit uncertain, really, that they're very salt tolerant. We have great evidence that they're salt tolerant, but how cold tolerant, et cetera, they are, we don't really know. So the question is, will Gem bring the same price to growers as Hass? And I say, talk to your board at Index. I have no control over that one. But, you know, we need to promote more than just Hass. Yeah, when lamb Hass was first released, I know I met people who said, well, you know, you're in August. The Hass is very high in oil, very mature. The lamb Hass is just starting its season. It's not going to taste like Hass. But there was a failure to recognize the fact that this is a fruit that doesn't overlap Hass, it's a complement to Hass. So, you know, we have to get that message across to the people that are marketing the fruit at the marketplace for us too. Dry matter is used as the indicator for minimum maturity. It used to be oil content, but in the 1980s, the industry switched over to dry matter. So what you do is you measure how, basically, you dry out the moisture in the fruit, in a tissue of fruit, and the percent dry matter is essentially that moisture content that you remove and what's left.
Essentially, dry matter is the oil content.
Yeah, it's a surrogate. They're very highly correlated. If you go to Avocado Source, you can read all about it from articles from the early 1980s by Sukun Lee and Charlie Coggins. The question is, what do I think of Reed? I think Reed is a wonderful variety to eat. It has some post-harvest challenges. We can't treat them like baseballs, like we treat Hass, because Hass, one reason that Hass is ascended to dominance is the fact that you don't really have to pay attention, because once it's ripe and you're marketing a ripe fruit, it hides all its blemishes. The reed will not do that. But I think, the reed is a very special fruit. I've never met anybody who doesn't like a reed. And I think marketed correctly to the right marketplaces, there is a bright future for reed as a specialty fruit.
What's the season?
Season, late season, August, September, October. I've had fruit from Roger Essick in Ojai as late as November.
October reeds are delicious.
Yeah, it is truly a wonderful variety. The Hass Carmen, or the Carmen Hass, Carmen Mendez, that is, for all intents and purposes, that the fruit looks like Hass. We did taste panels on that. It's slightly, the main bloom of Carmen is slightly earlier than the regular bloom of Hass, and so the fruit matures a little bit earlier. It's a good eating fruit. All our taste panel data show that it's equal to Hass in terms of eating quality. I haven't done any post-harvest work on it, but eating consumer panels, it's a very good eating fruit. Now, you have to deal with that off bloom and whether you like the off bloom or not. I think the reed, from an internal quality perspective, is very good. We've stored fruit for 3 to 4 weeks, maybe not quite as good as Hass, but it has good post-harvest. We had one selection I didn't talk about today from the breeding program. You can't hold it more than 10 days, and it's a disaster. So, yeah. But, the problem with the reed is the external appearance. You have to really take great care not to damage the peel of the fruit, because it's going to stay green. Now, in some of the selections that I showed you from the breeding program, we were ready to start detailed post-harvest evaluation when the California Avocado Commission cut funding to the program. So I have to stand here and tell you I have anecdotal refrigerator evidence about some of the stuff, but I don't have any laboratory-based research. I can tell you there is a couple things that don't store well, and we've dropped those from the program. Because we have to have something, especially with China opening up as a market, we have to have stuff that can take a boat ride or can get caught in the marketing chain in the United States. It has to have a minimum of 3 weeks storage life. And it also has to be capable of being ripened with ethylene. That's one of the problems with Pinkerton. Pinkerton takes forever to ripen, and it doesn't really take ethylene ripening very well. So we have to have two things. It has to have cold storage legs, and it also has to be able, you have to be able to ripen it with ethylene. Of the current ones we have now?
Well, that's all we have, right?
That's all we have?
Yeah.
That's a problem. I would plant reed. I would, for the people who absolutely have to have black avocados, I would play around with lamb Hass. We don't have anything really for that, November, December, bacon, zutano. Fuerte's good in December and January. If you wanted to take a gamble, go back to Fuerte a little bit.